Fidus was the professional alias of German illustrator and painter Hugo Höppener, whose style and subjects would be influential on the work of several of the psychedelic illustrators of the later 1960s. He was born in 1868 in the town of Lübeck, and his artistic talent and inclinations were obvious at an early age. He moved to Munich in 1887, intending to enroll at the Art Academy there, but after only a few months he encountered the older painter, socialist and self-styled apostle of nature, Karl Wilhelm Diefenbach. With his large extended family and a group of like-minded disciples, Diefenbach had set up a commune in an abandoned quarry miles from anywhere. The group practiced nudism, vegetarianism and absence from alcohol and tobacco. They also rejected the concept of private property and worshipped the sun. Bizarre and extreme as this may seem to many of us, this ideology and lifestyle made a serious impression on Höppener. He quickly became Diefenbach's most devoted acolyte and was awarded the name Fidus for his loyalty. In this phase of his career, Fidus's work revolved around natural themes, with usually naked figures, both young and old, in idyllic rural settings. In his mid-20s, he left the commune and moved to Berlin in 1892, where he first worked as an illustrator for the magazine Sphinx. And given his general creative and spiritual motivation, it was inevitable that he would also find his way into Jugend magazine. And very quickly his drawings and lithographs became a regular feature in their pages. Although there were some examples of his use of colour, Fidus was essentially a linear illustrator. And although there's no reason to suppose they were created as such, quite a bit of his line work emulated the graphic punch of woodcuts. But there were also plenty of examples of finer, more detailed use of what looked like pen and ink drawing, etchings and lithographs. Sadly, I can't find definitive information, but all of it was possessed of considerable grace and precision. And I can't be any more helpful when it comes to his colour application. I suspect there are examples of both ink with watercolour washes and some colour lithography work, if only because so many of Jugend's other artists were using that method. Over the coming years he continued to have magazine illustration published, some of which was commissioned, but a lot of which had also been created as art and then published purely as decoration. After the First World War ended in 1918, interest in Fidus's work began to fade quite rapidly. And although there's no stated reason I can find, it's quite likely that in the harsh reality of post-war Germany, his fanciful heroic imagery was no longer welcome. In later life he became an ardent supporter of the Nazi Party in the early 1930s, but ironically they wanted nothing to do with him, as they considered him unsuitably decadent. So much so his work was impounded in 1937, and sales of his art was banned completely. And although he went on to live to 80 years old, by the time he died in 1948, both he and his creative output had been completely forgotten. Sarah Stilwell Weber was born in Pennsylvania in 1878, and at the age of 19 in 1897 she began studying art with Howard Pyle at the Drexel Institute. Having completed her art education and armed with practical advice from Pyle, she went to New York to look for clients. Before long she was being commissioned by several magazines, and by the early years of the 20th century she had become fairly well established in the pages of Century and Harper's Bazaar. In 1904 she created her first duotone cover illustration for the Saturday Evening Post, and she quickly became one of their most popular and enduring choices, with a total of 60 covers to her name between 1904 and 1925. Apparently she hated working to deadlines, and she came to an agreement with her publishing clients that she would submit her cover art only when she thought it was completed. That they gave in to her demand is a clear indication of how highly she was regarded. The readers of the magazine she created illustration for were overwhelmingly female, and she catered to her audience with many images of female beauty, family life, and the innocence of childhood. Her style was essentially realist, although usually painted quite impressionistically. Her favoured medium was oil paint, but there were also quite a few departures into watercolour, which she used with equal dexterity. She did occasionally create some book illustration in black line with spot printed colour, but the clear majority of her output continued to be for magazines. Among others, she created a particularly attractive series of romantically themed full-colour covers for Collier's magazine between 1907 and 1914. And around the same time she also produced some suitably elegant cover art for Vogue. Her later work for the Saturday Evening Post also began to appear in full colour as the 1920s approached. Her popularity also led to some advertising commissions too, for which I can only assume she got over her aversion to deadlines. In 1920 she created a series of commercial illustrations which were used to promote the children's tricycle with the brand name Kiddie Cars. Both the product and the images she created were extremely popular, and her involvement made a significant contribution to her already large income. She had by now become one of the highest earning illustrators of the early 20th century, but in the mid-1920s and still only in her 40s, for reasons I can't find out, she appears to have stopped working altogether. Maybe she just figured she'd made enough money and wanted to enjoy it. And she died at her home in Philadelphia in 1939 at the age of 61. British illustrator and designer Charles Payne was born in Salford in 1895, and although that's just a couple of miles from where I'm sitting, I was previously unaware of his existence. He studied at Manchester School of Art and then the Royal College, although this was disrupted when he joined the army in the Great War. After the war he began a career designing stained glass for a firm in Glasgow, but it didn't last and he quickly transitioned into graphics and illustration. In 1919 he took a job teaching design at Edinburgh College of Art, and a year later, despite being hundreds of miles distant from the client, he received his first significant commission from London Transport. This was the poster Kingston by Tram, and its radically abstracted approach and use of non-naturalistic colour set the tone for much of what was to follow from Paine. His primary influence had been the work of Julius Klinger and the other poster artists of the Vienna Secession. Paine had clearly picked up on their ideology, which favoured minimalism and extreme posterisation. And the series of posters Paine went on to create for the various strands of the London transport system made this point with great clarity, and, once the public got used to the idea, popular success. His boat race poster in 1921 was an example of this, with the abstract forms and composition being the dominant aspect of the image. All his commercial work was created using gouache paint, which he applied both flat and with stipple dry brush techniques to add tonality and texture. His colour palettes were never less than striking and applied purely for their aesthetic contribution to the design. A couple of times during the 1920s, Paine left Edinburgh to teach briefly at Santa Barbara Art School in California, but for most of the decade he continued to create graphics, mostly for posters, but there were also some equally abstracted book cover designs. And in 1928 he produced an astonishingly attractive series of wildlife-themed colour calendar images for the Sundoor Textiles Company. This commission alone clearly showed what aesthetic beauty could be achieved through simplicity and abstraction. In the 1930s, he and his wife moved to live in Welwyn Garden City, a town which had been first established a decade earlier as an alternative to living in the already congested heart of London. And Paine created yet more memorable and visually daring illustrations for a series of posters and other publicity material designed to attract new residents to the virtues of living there. His success continued throughout the decade, and he also attracted the attention of major clients such as Shell Oil, who commissioned him for a series of playful posters. In the 1940s, Paine appears to have created fewer posters than in his heyday, but the quality of his work remained as high as it had always been. Among other projects, he created dynamic monochromes for school textbooks, and although they can't have been particularly lucrative, there's no feeling that he treated them with any less care and consideration than his more profitable commissions. In 1948 he moved again to live on the island of Jersey in the English Channel, and not long after Paine retired from commercial work, but painted watercolour landscapes up to his death in 1967 when he was 72 years old. Lynd Ward was born in 1905 in Chicago, Illinois, and although possessed of obvious artistic talent, he chose to study at Columbia Teachers College in New York rather than attend art school. Once he graduated, he married, and the couple immediately left the USA for an extended trip travelling around Eastern Europe. After a few months they settled in Leipzig in Germany, where Ward took a year-long course in graphic art and gained experience of etching, lithography and wood engraving. And significantly for his subsequent career, he also discovered and was impressed by Franz Mazaril's wordless novel, The Sun. He returned to the United States in 1927, and within a year he'd completed his first commission to illustrate Dorothy Rowe's The Begging Deer, a collection of Japanese stories. He then collaborated with his wife, May McNear, on another book of Japanese folk tales, Prince Bantam, which was published in 1929. But most significantly, his own wordless novel was published in the same year. This was the book God's Man, and it was the first of its kind to be published in America. This fantasy about an artist who exchanges his soul for an enchanted paintbrush was never going to be a bestseller, but even so it sold more than 20,000 copies. Like the European works that had inspired him, it was created entirely as black and white woodcut illustrations, and it was highly praised by critics, which gave him the impetus to produce 5 more between 1930 and 1937. Although more than capable of working successfully in any number of other mediums, all of these were also created as woodcuts, and the last of them was Vertigo, published in 1937. Also worthy of note was his highly distinctive interpretation, also woodcut, of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in 1936. Ward also explored some tonal illustrations in line and wash for a series of children's books, including more with his wife May McNear, such as the story of the boy and moose My Friend Mac. In the later 1930s he also used what looks very much like stone lithography, although that's not verified, to illustrate The Haunted Omnibus, a collection of ghost stories. And in 1938 Ward started to illustrate books published by the Heritage Limited Editions Club, including a 2-colour edition of The Count of Monte Cristo. Details of his later life are virtually non-existent, but he retired in 1979 to Reston, Virginia, where he died in 1985 at 80 years old. That's the end of this video, and I hope you'll tune in when the next one makes its appearance.